I'm Mark Golub, and in the news, a controversy once again at the United Nations relating to the State of Israel. This time, the flap centered around an exhibition at the United Nations building in New York City entitled Israel Matters. The exhibition, which was produced by Israel's permanent mission to the UN and by the Israel advocacy organization Stand With Us, premiered on Monday, April 4th, and consisted of 13 separate panels featuring both text and photographs. However, during the preceding weekend, the weekend preceding the exhibit's premiere, the UN insisted that 3 panels in the exhibition had to be removed on the grounds that they were, quote, inappropriate, unquote, in their depiction of Zionism, Jerusalem, and Arab Israelis. Now let's take a look at these 3 panels one by one, all of which the UN found to be inappropriate. The first panel deals with Zionism and describes Zionism as the liberation movement of the Jewish people who sought to overcome 1,900 years of oppression and regain self-determination in their indigenous homeland. Here is the panel describing Jerusalem, and it reads, Jerusalem has been the center of focus of Jewish life and religion for more than 3 millennia, and is holy to Christians and Muslims as well. And finally, here is the Arab Israeli panel, and it says, Arab Israelis are the largest minority in Israel, making up 20% of the Israeli population, and they are considered to be equal citizens under the laws of Israel. Those are the panels which the United Nations Department of Public Affairs found to be inappropriate, suggesting somehow that they are not in conformity with the purposes and principles of the United Nations. What is the United Nations talking about? How in any way do those 3 panels diverge from the purposes and principles of the United Nations, and what in the world makes them inappropriate? Well, thankfully, neither the Israeli mission to the United Nations nor the organization Stand With Us took this insulting UN action lying down. Israel's UN ambassador, Danny Danon, responded by saying, the UN must reverse this outrageous decision and apologize to the Jewish people. Zionism and Jerusalem are the foundation stones and the moral basis upon which the State of Israel was founded. And the executive director of the Northeast region of Stand With Us, Shahar Azani, also responded as well, and I'm pleased to say with some positive results. And here to tell us more of the story, I am so pleased to have on our JBS phones an individual I hope you know well from his many appearances on JBS and from his own JBS series, Eye on Israel, the executive director of the Northeast region of Stand With Us, Shahar Azani. Shahar, thank you so much for joining us once again.
Mark, it's my pleasure to be again on JBS, and may I thank you again for the important service you provide for the pro-Israel and the Jewish community in general in empowering the community and the public with knowledge and allowing them to open avenues for activity to make a difference in everything that's happening today. And as you said, it's highly needed.
Thank you so very much, Shahar. So, Shahar, to begin with, we take a look at these slides. There doesn't seem to be anything controversial or objectionable in them. What do you think really was behind the UN's attempt to censure those 3 panels in your exhibition, Israel Matters?
I have to tell you, Mark, this entire incident caught us by complete surprise. When we came up with the initiative, along with our friends at the UN, Israel mission to the UN, and Ambassador Danon. We've been discussing this with them for a few months now. We wanted to be able to engage the public and those who attend meetings at the UN with some relevant, positive information about Israel that gives the entire picture. And therefore, we came up with the idea of having the display there. And we chose the months of April and May, because the exhibition will be there for a few days now and for a few days in May, in order to, we chose months that are busy on UN schedule. Mm-hmm. And I must tell you that when we received the notice Saturday night that the UN is reconsidering some of the panels, we were very surprised because, as you presented before, these present very mainstream narrative as it pertains to Zionism, Israel, and even the existence of non-Jewish citizens of the State of Israel.
Yes.
And to me, it gives, here is what I think. We live in a time where these words, the concept of Zionism, Jerusalem, it's been expropriated from the jargon of the pro-Israel community. If a bureaucrat at the UN building sits there and feels inside that there is something pejorative or not appropriate, as you said before, with the word Zionism, that shows that we live at a time where we need to reclaim the word Zionism.
Exactly.
We reclaim the concept of Jerusalem. Let people know that Jerusalem is not only a center of political disagreement, but it's a focal point for the Jewish people for centuries and centuries, more so than anyone else, even though we do mention that it's sacred to others as well. And once we allowed others to take over our narrative, this is the result.
Exactly. You know, what you said struck me exactly the same way. I found the slides to be remarkably inclusive. You went out of your way to say that Jerusalem was an important city to Christians and Muslims. You go out of your way in the slide about Arab Israelis to talk about how they are equal citizens, and whether Israel is perfect or not, it is remarkable in its attempt to be an inclusive democracy. So that I found, if anything, the slides to be laudatory. And I said to myself, I just don't understand what this is about. And it occurs to me, Shahar, and I want to hear your opinion, that somehow this UN objection is part of a larger movement that we've seen developing more and more throughout the world, where there's an attempt to delegitimize the State of Israel, basically to dismantle the State of Israel, and that anything having to do with Israel, people who object will find some reason to say it is inappropriate. So I'm asking you, to the extent to which you feel this particular UN action was symptomatic of a larger problem.
Well, it is. I don't believe that the perpetrators, the bureaucrats themselves who made that decision, were necessarily part of this, a grand strategy. But it's a clear manifestation of the kind of poison that trickles within the UN and in its corridors when the word Zionism, which clearly is nothing more and nothing less than the Jewish people's right for self-determination, something that's lauded for any other people on the face of the earth, and is only being mistreated when it comes to the Jews. And I think this needs to light, a red bulb in our heads and wake us up to a reality that exists today, when if Zionism is perceived to be something that needs to be feared, then Zionism needs to be explained. Jerusalem needs to be explained. It's time we don't take anything, Mark, anything for granted. And I want to share with you a story. I just finished a few minutes ago a talk at Westchester Community College to the Humanities School, discussing bridging the gaps in society between people. And it was a great engagement with a general public audience, non-Jews, not necessarily pro-Israel. And one of the issues we spoke about was engagements within the UN. So I want to tell you a story that our viewers might not be aware of.
Please.
When I served at the United Nations Environment Program, it deals with a variety of issues which seem to be very boring or not so quote-unquote appealing, like the Security Council or the Human Rights Council. And one of them happened to be migratory birds. And Israel is a focal point for migratory birds on their path. And the convention dealing with migratory birds was signed in 1971. It's called the Ramsar Convention, and it's named after the city in Iran where it was signed. Of course, we know what happened in Iran in 1979 when the Khomeini came to power and the Islamic Republic was created. Long story short, fast forward a couple of decades, Iran is printing out maps as part of the convention meeting of the Ramsar Convention, maps of migratory birds. Mm-hmm. That's all it did. It just printed maps of migratory birds, and you can imagine what country was missing on that map.
Mm-hmm.
And this was allowed within the UN building to distribute maps in the course of the professional conference on migratory birds, and that map omitted the state of Israel and showed the bird's path as flying over the Middle East without any mention of the existence of a Jewish state. It seems small, it seems minute, it doesn't seem as appealing as the UN Human Rights Council report on the territories, but this is the poison we need to fight. It starts from the very low ranks of everyday dealings of the UN, and once that becomes common, we are at risk.
I appreciate the story very much. You would think migratory birds would not be an issue. So, Shahar,
exactly.
I already showed what Ambassador Danon's response was to the attempt to censor your exhibit. What did you do in response?
Well, we immediately launched a campaign using the media and, of course, social media to show, express our concern, literally, by the way, saying that the fact that the UN rejected Zionism from being displayed in its midst shows that the UN cannot stomach the concept of Zionism and the foundation upon which the state of Israel is standing. And therefore, as Ambassador Danon said, we joined his call that the UN must reverse their decision and get back to their senses, because this is one of the most disrespectful moves towards Israel that anyone could imagine. And I fail to think of any other nation on earth that would be mistreated in such a way, and things will be able to go by as if nothing happened. Mm-hmm. We have to put a stop to it, and today, one of the major lessons that we stated as much, one of the major lessons we learn is you don't give up on your principles. Mm-hmm. You make an effort to make a difference. If you keep quiet when something like this happens, then things will become worse more and more. And it needs to be nipped in the bud, and unfortunately, it's far farther from the bud than it needs to be nipped.
Yes. So take us through this. Literally, what has happened? What did the UN do, and to what extent has the UN now changed its position on the three panels?
So the work of the media, the fact that we're on JBS now, talking and discussing the issue and making so many of our viewers aware of the topic is important, because people make comments and react, and they cannot react about something they're not aware of. So you, Mark, and JBS play a significant role in standing up for Israel and standing up and reclaiming the lost honor of Zionism. In helping influence public pressure, we created an atmosphere that's conducive for the Israeli permanent mission to the United Nations, headed by Ambassador Danon, to work through their diplomatic channels in order to apply pressure on the UN Secretariat and the administrative organ of the UN to allow the exhibition and the display to go on as usual. So far, out of the three panels, we've been successful only as far as Zionism is concerned. But for some reason, they do believe that showcasing the existence of Arab Israelis or the Jewish connection to Jerusalem is still somewhat offensive to the nature and the principles of the United Nations. We've no intention of giving up. We're on the air now. We'll continue applying pressure on social media. Soon we're going to release a video onto our social media outlets of Stand With Us and the UN mission, the Israeli UN Permanent Mission, telling the story, making sure that the public is aware and people come together. This is a warning sign that wakes us up to what needs to be done, going back to the roots, to the values. You know, it's no longer about explaining an incident in the West Bank or in Jerusalem.
Yes.
It's about explaining our core, our essence, our very being. And you're absolutely right, Mark, in stating that it's our very essence that's being challenged.
Yes. So basically what we've learned, Shahar, is There are 3 panels. Let's put the 3 panels back up on the screen, Sloan. 3 panels were initially singled out by the UN. They shouldn't be shown. Israeli Arabs are on the left, Zionism is in the middle, and Jerusalem is on the right. And what you've said is they have recanted, they've taken back their censorship on Zionism, the middle panel, but they are still, in essence, forbidding you to show the Israeli Arab panel and the Jerusalem panel. Do I have it?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And let me tell you also, I don't know if our viewers are aware, but the UN holds a permanent exhibition on the Palestinian people on the 3rd floor of the building that's there year-round. The UN also shows different displays during the year on this issue, and of course we know that no other date than November 29th do they commemorate the International Solidarity Day with the Palestinian people. So the fact is that we are being given a stage, and by the way, the exhibition will be there only for a few days now and a few days during May. But don't we deserve the same kind of manifestation of our values just like anyone else on UN stage, Mark?
By the way, explain to people why the date November 29th has been chosen to celebrate, in essence, the Palestinian Arab cause.
The UN's resolution, November 29th, the UN resolution of the establishment of the State of Israel coincides with what they commemorate as their Nakba, or their catastrophe, as a result. So in essence, the UN is commemorating the catastrophe of the establishment of the State of Israel on the same day that the UN in its original form announced the reestablishment of the Jewish state. And I have to tell you, in many ways, and I commented as much to the media when I was asked on the issue at the beginning, I believe that the UN today, with its behavior and attitudes, would be downright unrecognizable
Yes.
to those who came up with the notion of the UN and the higher values of dialogue and humanity as were manifested in the establishment of this organization. And it's a shame. It's time we get it back on track.
All right, I want to present to you the possible argument that those who disagree with us would pose to us. They might say the following. Look, Jerusalem is still a contentious issue. It's not clear whether, the United States still will not move its embassy to Jerusalem. There's a question as to if there is ever a two-state solution, a reconciliation between Israelis and Palestinians. How will the city of Jerusalem be administered? Will it remain a united Jewish city? Will it be divided? Will it be an international city? And therefore, the argument is that in a exhibition about Israel, Jerusalem has to be kept out. Let's take them one at a time. What would you argue about that perspective and the reason why someone might say, well, yes, the UN isn't against Israel, but it is trying to protect an issue which still is up for discussion in the international community?
So let me ask you this. Before I get into any elaborate answer, do you imagine a reality in which the Palestinians show a display about Palestine and showcase Al-Quds, not Jerusalem, but Al-Quds, and the UN tells them no?
No, I cannot.
Exactly. Which when we show a display, as you mentioned before, which is very respectful, which acknowledges other people's rights, at the same time acknowledges ours, that is a reason to display it, not to display it. So with all due respect, I fail to understand the reasoning for putting something, for not allowing, only because it's showing the Jewish connection to Jerusalem?
I know it is astounding.
I'm a reasonable person, Mark, and I really can't bring myself to understand what went through the minds of people at the UN when such an innocent, innocuous, decent display showcasing Israel's fundamental values is shown. What's so obscene about it?
Okay. And what could be their argument against the Arab-Israeli slide? And again, I could see them saying, Israel still hasn't given Palestinians or Arab Israelis enough rights, and is there a right of return? I don't know. And did Israel somehow displace Arab Palestinians during the War of Independence, but all you did was describe the reality that 20% of the state of Israel today is Arab Israeli. I keep reminding our audience the state of Israel has an Arab Israeli sitting on the Supreme Court of the state of Israel who administered the last elections and was also the presiding Supreme Court justice in a trial of an Israeli president who was sentenced to jail. The Israeli Knesset has an Arab Israeli party which has members in it who basically preach sedition, and yet they're permitted to exist. The state of Israel permits inside its own borders, Shahar, a celebration by Israeli Arabs of the Nakba, which again, as you just described, is an event that commemorates, from their perspective, the destruction, the disaster of the creation of the state of Israel. So it's hard for me to understand what about that third slide. Put it up for one moment, Sloan. It's hard for me to understand what is objectionable. I mean, the slide even features at the very top an Arab Israeli in Arab Israeli garb, and it simply says, Jerusalem is an international culture that incorporates the Arab Israeli. What do you think could be against this slide that would make the UN call it inappropriate?
I honestly cannot even start thinking about any reasonable reason or excuse that would prevent them from showcasing this fundamental and incredibly important fact about Israel. The fact is, Mark, that so many out there have no idea about the state of Israel, are ignorant about the state itself, and the perception is because it's Israel, because it's of the Jewish community and the Jewish world, many out there believe that the only people who reside in Israel are Jews, and anyone
Yes.
who's an Israeli is synonymous with being Jewish. There is nothing wrong in letting people know that the reality that was created in Israel is such that incorporates so many people who are Israelis, many of them proud Israelis, and many of them not even Jewish.
Yes.
And that makes the achievement even far bigger, better, and brighter. And it should be in the interest of the United Nations to showcase that panel and not to hide it. I
Yes.
really cannot even fathom. I can't understand what would bring them to disqualify that one.
Okay, I am sure there are some people watching us right now throughout the country saying to themselves, what's wrong with you guys? It's pure anti-Semitism. Shahar, to what extent is this simply an expression of anti-Semitism masquerading as an attempt to be in some way sophisticated about the state of Israel?
You know, we always go back to the lines of anti-Semitism, and many a time we need to be careful in how we use it. Sometimes it is anti-Semitic, sometimes it's a legitimate criticism of Israel. So Natan Sharansky gave us the triple Ds, the delegitimization of Israel, the double standards of it. When you think about how the state of Israel is being singled out by the United Nations, is being focused on by the United Nations, on the Human Rights Council, on the annual anti-Israel resolutions they take every year, there is a deeply ingrained anti-Israel sentiment in the United Nations, which is very dangerous, and we have to stand up against it. What we are seeing happening today, I am yet to see another country whose exhibits are disqualified because its core values supposedly do not commensurate with those of the UN. When I see that, I'll say that there is no hint of anti-Semitism. But when the Jewish state is being singled out, when Jewish values are being devalued, when the Jewish connection to what has been the spiritual and physical capital of the Jewish people for generations is being ignored by the UN, and when the right of the Jewish people for self-determination is in effect negated by UN bureaucrats, then I can't see it in any other way but anti-Semitism.
Okay. One more related issue, Shahar. There is an unsettling move within the United Nations to pass a resolution creating a Palestinian state on the West Bank outside of negotiations between the parties. It seems as if the UN opposition of the historical facts depicted in the three panels is again related to this larger anti-Israel sentiment among a large number of UN countries. Do you worry that the objection to your display, your exhibition, is a part of a larger UN movement among too many of the UN nations now that ultimately is going to create havoc in the Middle East by trying at least to force a Palestinian state on the region and to put the United States, by the way, in a very difficult position? Hopefully it will veto any such move. But there are American Jews who are now worried that the United States might be sucked in. But how do you see the reaction to your specific exhibition relating to the larger issue of movement in the UN to establish a Palestinian state?
Well, I don't see any direct connection between the bureaucrats who made that decision and the Security Council, but it definitely is a manifestation of an atmosphere that exists in the UN building vis-a-vis Israel, and there is nothing that we object more at this point than unilateral measures imposed on Israel to change realities on the ground, simply because it will do nothing but augment paperwork that's never going to be implemented, that cannot be implemented, because only through partnership and cooperation can we actually change the realities on the ground because of the complicated, intertwining nature of the existence of the Israel and the Palestinian people. Mm-hmm. So without focusing on that kind of work and just adding more paperwork to the UN will delegitimize the United Nations even further in the eyes of the Israeli public, will derail any potential of partnership between Israel and the Palestinians, and will render the United Nations one more time as a useless entity whose very existence might be put into question by those who observe its activity.
I'm afraid you're 100% correct. Shahar Azani, you do fabulous work. You know, you're one of my favorite people in the world. I am so proud of the work you're doing at Stand With Us. You've got to speak as much as you possibly can all over, not only America, but on JBS all the time. There is nobody like you, and I got to get you in studio in the very near future and talk to you face to face.
Thank you very much.
But thank you for the work you're doing.
Mark.
Don't quit. I still hope that somehow you can resurrect the 2 slides that the UN has continued to censor, and that you will ultimately have a complete victory. But the work you do is outstanding, not only for the state of Israel, but for the Jewish people. And I appreciate you enormously, Shahar. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mark.
We'll see each other soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, my friend. The thoughts of Shahar Azani, Executive Director of the Northeast Region of Stand With Us. And if you're a supporter of the state of Israel, if you're an American who simply believes in international justice, then you look at what the United Nations has done in general towards Israel over the last, since the 1970s, since their declaration, Zionism is racism, which was rescinded. But it's incredible that the UN would ever pass such a resolution. And there are remnants of that same philosophy and attitude and perspective in the halls of the UN, even today, and they're being played out with this exhibit, Israel Matters, produced by the Israeli Mission to the United Nations and by Stand With Us. We can only hope that Denny Danon and Shahar Azani, and maybe any response from our viewers, from JBS, will be effective in changing the UN's perspective on this exhibition, and ultimately all 3 panels will be once again part of the exhibition. As always, my thanks to our director, Sloan Copeland, our production coordinator, Serge Goldberg, to the associate director of JBS, Dara Golub, and to the producer of In the News, Carol Lilienthal. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.